Today is Tuesday, the 7th of November, 2017, depending on where you are in the world, that is. But the block height, wherever you are in the world, is 493,542. My name is Chris Ellis. This is Block Digest, and I will be handing over today's host, Shinobi Monkey.
Ooh, 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 ooh.
Yeah.
Today, I'm happy we've got Chris back. Not fully, but he's inching in there. We're also joined by a special guest today, J.W. Weatherman.
Hey, guys.
Team Master Rick.
Hey, everyone. How are y'all?
Miss Janine.
Guten Tag.
And a life test for Acnix. Are you there, Acnix? Are you alive?
I think that's a no.
Uh-oh.
Maybe.
Not looking good. Not looking good.
Uh-oh.
All right. He's on the Bitcoin bus.
Yeah, I think your mic input's a little messed up, Ax. I see you muting yourself. But this category of stories that I'm getting more and more sick of by the day. Yeah, 2x updates. Yeah, we have to. We have to.
All right. Let's plow through this shit one more time.
Well, the Ledger folks are going to be doing the thing that the hardware wallet people are doing. They're providing access to both sides of the fork. But one thing compared to Treasury's announcement the other day, Ledger is actually explicitly clarifying that they intend to integrate the chain split project that Eric Lombroso is working on as one of the methods to split using Ledger. But they're pretty much going to be offering that and a homebrewed solution themselves. And the idea is that users will have like a kind of spectrum of trust models to choose from. For those not comfortable having anybody in control of their coins at any point in the process, obviously they're going to try to link into the chain split software when it's released. But they're also going to pretty much automate an in-house mechanism using the trusted computing environment on the Ledger. And they didn't go too much into specifics, but I think the idea is they're going to have their own tainted outputs and effectively just kind of transfer keys directly so that users' wallets can automatically include the pre-tainted outputs in their transactions, at which point control over those will be handed back to Ledger. And I'm not really too happy with the idea of the trust model involved there, but for people who are okay with using it, I guess there's another option, and there's nothing really wrong with having more options for doing things. So, okay, what's the next 2x update, Chris? I need to roll through this before I want to kill myself.
There you go. There you go. Satoshi Citadel.
All right, so Satoshi Citadel is effectively not supporting the fork period. Like they're going to take the steps they can to actually allow users to withdraw 2x coins from their platform, but at this time it looks like they don't really have any intent to directly support 2x or kind of play any of the games a lot of other companies in the space are doing. And they actually kind of went through a nice rationale where they explained like the importance of the bit process and actually taking a proposal and submitting it to be vetted by the community, and the importance of actual community consensus on incorporating new changes into the network. So I think Satoshi Citadel is kind of showing as a company, at least the people in charge now have a much better grasp on why we are all here than a lot of these big companies like Coinbase or BitPay. Can we just charge straight through to the next one?
Yeah, come on. Next one. Bittrex. What's Bittrex doing?
Bittrex is kind of playing the middle ground a little bit. They're going to definitively consider Bitcoin at first, and effectively have an observation period immediately after the fork. And the way they're stating this, they're not even convinced that a fork is going to happen. So the observation period is mostly to make sure that the fork actually occurs. And at that point, they're pretty much going to play it a little by ear, and depending on the stability of the fork, either open a 2x market or extend the observation period to see how the situation plays out. And they've kind of left themselves a little out to possibly start referring to 2x as Bitcoin in the future, but they're kind of playing a lot more conservatively, as a lot of these announcements have been leaning towards over the past week or so. So, and I believe we had one more kind of silly, Alex Petrov. He is one of my favorite people in this ecosystem as far as actually like sussing through data to arrive at conclusions or assess things. But I have to say, he has become a gigantic troll since the New York agreement was first announced. This is pretty much just a tweet pointing to the Bitcoin India block that was 1.6 megabytes a few days ago, and just a trolly thread that's sketched out from this. But it's not really a firm withdrawal from the 2x agreement yet, and I think until things actually clarify themselves a little more, we're going to continue seeing Alex Petrov be a little trolly. Not that I can really knock him for that.
Right. It feels like all of them are a little trolly at this point. All of them except, guys that are coming out like this SCI statement saying, basically just giving real good logical reasons again as to why this fork, they're not going to support it, stating, it needs overwhelming consensus, the lack of technical dev team, lack of replay protection. And all those things make sense, and it feels like we are playing a big game here, and just sort of like with Bittrex saying like 24 to 48 hours they're going to judge after the fork. And we get a lot of these statements where it's like a lot of people are definitive this way and a lot of people are wishy-washy, and then there are the few that are definitive for 2x. And I feel like maybe with these chain split tools and stuff like this coming up, maybe that'll start to change some of their tunes. And just the whole game theory behind this is real interesting as far as how's it going to play out. I don't know, but we'll stick around and see how it goes.
Yeah, we will be keeping you up to date, blow by blow. As boring as that may be for Shinobi, you can also follow along in the description below. You'll find all the links to the topics that we're discussing. What's up next, Monkey?
Some more stuff about things that I think
I thought we were going to discuss the game theory with
right.
We got a guest, remember?
I don't know what I'm doing, Chris. I just want this all to end. Let's let JW.
Welcome. I want to welcome our guest JW in the house.
Thanks, guys.
Tell us about yourself, man.
Yeah, so I'm happy to definitely show up and talk about SegWit 2x. I've been working on the chain split project with Eric and Adam and those guys, but and I'm obviously a big fan of it. But I really wanted to hang out with you guys and kind of give you my perspective, not the perspective of the project, because the project doesn't really, they want to be ambiguous for good reason, right? They want everybody to use the tool and empower their users as a result of it. But I can come on and say, what I think is really going on. What I think is really going on is this is just the latest in, it might sound redundant to say it, but I think that it's good to recognize that this is nothing more than the latest in a series of attacks on Bitcoin. It's not necessarily all that new and creative when you look at it in context of all the previous attacks. So I'd say if you go back to, far enough, people were trying to do this particular attack of raising the block size to a dangerous level. And it is a dangerous level all the way back to through the BIP process, right? We had like Mike Hearn and Gavin trying to push Bitcoin XT, Bitcoin Unlimited, all these sort of things. And then they were going to fork as a result, and then they never did. And so all of this stuff is not it's not new. But what's good about this situation, why we shouldn't get totally frustrated and just disgusted with it, is that the attacks are getting a little bit more and more desperate. And with every attack, Andreas Antonopoulos always talks about this immune system thing, right? So with every attack, we are getting more and more capable and more able to deal with this nonsense that's being thrown at Bitcoin. And I personally see a huge landscape of attacks on Bitcoin, and I would include everything from Litecoin to Ethereum in that spectrum, because they're an attempt to create a less secure money. Bitcoin's goal, it's not a brand name, right? Who cares whether it's called Bitcoin or not? What we care about is trying to create an actual secure money, and an actually secure money would be we can say censorship resistant, but really what we mean is a money that is so secure that even governments can't steal it, right? Something that you can own, that nobody can take away from you. And stuff like Ethereum and Litecoin, they're intentionally designed with the idea of taking kind of the Bitcoin concept and breaking that away, right? Litecoin was designed specifically to take Bitcoin and do a GPU-based miner, right? All that means is that it's a weaker amount of proof of work being done. That's all they got, right? So that's not something that is designed to create a more secure money.
Eventually, wait, can I just jump in? Can I just jump in a second? Yeah. So I'll make a quick comment about the Litecoin thing, because I was there and I can sort of talk about it. And then I'd also like to get a little bit of background on you, if that's okay. Maybe tell the audience a bit about yourself and how you got into this. You sound like you're very well versed in Bitcoin. You know an awful lot about it and its history. And whilst you were talking, I even pulled up an old post from 2013 from Mike Hearn on the Bitcoin Foundation forum, saying, let's start a discussion about red listing. But quickly back onto the point about Litecoin. Okay, so I was around when I got really into Bitcoin, I guess, when Litecoin came around. It was after Fairbricks and Tenebricks. Tenebricks came first, and then there was Fairbricks. And then my first foray into crypto was my flatmate at the time, never stopped me going on about it, on and on about Bitcoin. I thought it was a scam. I didn't know anything about it. But I had an office full of graphics machines, because I worked in the film business and I did posters and editing. So when I learned about this thing, it was like, cool. What? So over the weekend, I mean, all the electricity was included. Litecoin came along, and I met what I now know as crypto miners, I guess, nerds on various forums, Bitcoin Talk, and also in the troll box on BTCE back in the day, right? And the reason why those script coins were starting to emerge was because there was a vocation there. There was like a whole industry of guys like me, mostly guys who maybe they worked in a university, or maybe they did something where they had access to that kind of hardware, graphics hardware, and they were being priced out of the mining business. You had Butterfly Labs, you had all these scams, you would pre-order them, they would just send you shit, hardware, and you couldn't get into mining anymore. But mining wasn't just about making money. It was also about currency choice. Like, people were choosing where to direct their hashing power. I know a few miners who lost, hundreds of thousands of dollars just because they wanted to mine, Feathercoin over Litecoin, or they wanted to mine this coin rather than that coin, or even miners who would attack other coins. And the script coins made that more democratic. Right. And that's why I feel that came along. But why don't you start, just give us a little bit of your background, like who you are, and then maybe you can speak to some of that.
So as far as background goes, I kind of have to rely on just the strength of my arguments, because if I try to give you guys my resume, then I put myself in a really vulnerable spot. Right. I use a pen name. I want to be as vocal as possible. And I don't want to be subject to stuff like, getting swatted. You know what I mean? I have sort of other soft spots that are bigger than stuff like Jameson Lopez. And so I really can't be in a position, like a lot of the guys that are involved in the cypherpunk movement. I can't really be in a position to share my background and my identity. And if I was even just to give you guys like projects that I'd worked on and things like that, it'd be really easy to figure out who I am. And basically, I'm not trying to be like hardened against like the NSA. I'm trying to be hardened against people that are just kind of, the kind of people that'll pick up the phone and call the SWAT team on you. You get a 5% chance of getting shot. And if you have a gun, maybe it's a 25% chance, and it's a free phone call. And there's a lot of stuff like that.
You can talk about your persona though within the Bitcoin space, right? I mean, what are you known for within Bitcoin?
So what I can say is I've been in software security since the mid 90s. I've been if I was to go to Black Hat, people would know who I was, right? I have worked. I've worked in this space for a long time in general. I'm actually relatively late to the game when it comes to Bitcoin. I was working on problems like this in the late 90s, but I wasn't hanging out in San Francisco with Adam Back, right? So I don't want to give the impression that I'm more than I am, but I have been working on software security problems for, gosh, I guess a couple decades now. So hopefully that's good enough. And then, I don't really want to make arguments based on sort of my resume anyway, right? So it does suck. I mean, I do feel like I've earned I've earned a place at the conversation, but it does suck to have to give that up. But on the other hand, it just makes it easier, right? You can decide if I'm full of it or not based on what I say, rather than
I think lots of people in Bitcoin have got their Bitcoin identity, right? And so that's what I mean. It's like maybe you hang out on the IRC, and that's how people might know you.
No, actually, I mean, I would say that this current identity is about 2 weeks old or something like that.
All right,
so.
okay, cool.
So I can't even.
Yeah, okay. Well, let's get back into it then.
So let me respond to what you were saying about Litecoin. And I'm making some extreme statements, and I don't want to insult anybody that's worked on it, right? Because I think the reason that it was a good attack is that you could get a lot of well-meaning, good people to do it, right? Like a lot of these things are far more effective if they're easy. If it's easy to deceive people into it, right? So let me give you a proposal, and you tell me if this sounds like an attack or not. Setting Litecoin aside, what if I came to you and I said, okay, Bitcoin's chugging along, and what we want to do is we want to weaken Bitcoin, right? We know enough about economics to know that Bitcoin's a new digital asset, which is a whole new weird thing, and because it's digital, it has properties that make it really effective to be used as money. It's really not effective for anything else, right? You can't fill teeth with it like you can gold, but you can transfer it instantly anywhere in the world, right? Or within 10 minutes. So and I think Satoshi on one of the forums used this example. Like, imagine you found this metal and it's useless, right? But it's limited in supply. It's really easy to subdivide, and you can instantly transfer it from any point on the planet to any other point on the planet, right? It's not going to be good by definition for anything else, but it might be good as money. Now, one of the things about money is that it's only money if it's used as a unit of account. This is an economics concept, right? And what that means is basically if you price things in it, then it's money. So if you go to the UK, then pounds are money. If you're in the United States, dollars are money. And that's an important distinction, because whichever asset gets that position becomes super valuable for no other reason than it works for this problem. It doesn't work for anything else. So if I came to you and I said, okay, with all of that in context, what if we could create a digital asset? Because we don't like the idea that this is secure, right? Let's say we're a government and we have our dollars. If I came to you and said, one of the things that we could do, because it's open source, it seems pretty secure. We've gone through the code. We can't find a way to break it. What if we could create a digital asset that looked really attractive, maybe even more attractive than Bitcoin, but was flawed in some way? It had a weakness that wasn't super obvious to everybody involved, but would allow us to co-opt it and control it later. And let's say that weakness is a proof of work system, right? That is not, it's not optimized, because the concept of proof of work is you want to take electrons and you want to transfer that into a hash as efficiently as possible. And if you can do that as efficiently as possible, then nobody else can come along and dominate you, right? That's kind of the idea. If I can come along and I could, I don't know, quantum computing, or that's not even a good example, but if I could come up with something that was exponentially better than your proof of work, exponentially more efficient, then I could dominate your proof of work, right? So that's essentially, and Dan Kaminsky, I kind of give him credit a little bit for this concept. I don't know if that's fair or not, but he did one of the early security reviews on Bitcoin, and he said the problem with Bitcoin is that it's using ASICs, right? And if we can come up with an algorithm, some kind of work that that is ASIC resistant, I think is what he called it. And I don't know the timing, if that was before or after Litecoin, but that's a flaw. You don't want something to be ASIC resistant.
Well, I mean, I kind of like really quick, like two things to kind of comment on what you said. Like as far as like the efficiency in terms of like, you know, CPU versus GPU versus FPGA and ASIC, like I think that's more of kind of an indirect measure of the security of something. And I think it more comes down to the total net amount of energy and the cost of that, and the simply like the pretty much how far down that efficiency in terms of chips you go is more like a throttle that affects how well that's distributed, and then how cost effective it is to attack things. And I mean, like, to a degree, I actually think that given the same amount of energy, it could be theoretically more secure to have something throttled at like the CPU or GPU level, because then it's harder to concentrate larger amounts of energy into a more dominant percentage of like the overall hash rate that energy is going into. And
Right.
and two
I
real
don't,
quick though.
I don't
real
disagree
quick,
with that though. I mean,
but,
what you're saying right there is, if it were possible to create a problem that you could only solve in a CPU or a GPU, then it would be fine. But that's
Yeah.
theoretically not possible, right? It's not possible
Yeah,
to create a
exactly.
problem that you can't create specialized hardware to solve that problem more efficiently.
Yeah, and exactly. But like that's kind of like, you know, I definitely see where you're coming from with like Ethereum as an attack vector of sorts against Bitcoin. But with Litecoin, I think it's more just like Charlie didn't really appreciate like how that dynamic plays out, and that you really can't like definitively say that this is like ASIC proof, that I've like cut the throttle after this certain point.
Yeah,
And
and
then as far
I'm
as
not,
like,
when I say an attack, I'm not necessarily imputing motives, but the end result, right? Like if we were to sit in a dark room and, you know, smoke cigars, this would be actually a pretty good attack, right? It'd be in
yeah,
the top 10 of things that you could do to try to destroy Bitcoin.
yeah, and then like the second thing is like one of the things that has always kind of bugged me when people look at like the Bitcoin incentive structure is they always analyze it in a vacuum. And like I think at this point that is a completely like flawed way to analyze it, because like Bitcoin's isolated incentive structure effectively exists now in like a meta incentive structure that includes or encompasses all of the different crypto systems out there and their own isolated like incentive systems. So you have all of these like competing systems that in a way are a vacuum, but not in how they interact with each other. So you have like the incentives of one thing able to distort the incentives of another just through its sheer presence. And like
Yeah,
one of the things that
absolutely.
like, because like that is such an important thing to understand, in my opinion, when looking at the different attack vectors with Bitcoin. Because if you don't appreciate how it fits into that meta incentive structure, you're not really analyzing Bitcoin's incentive structure properly.
Right.
I couldn't agree more. That's a great point.
I was gonna say, yeah, like you know, the UASF, we really kind of didn't know entirely how that was going to play out until we saw it play out with Litecoin. And it's one of the things where it's like, you know, I can imagine whenever I wasn't really here when Litecoin first came out, so I didn't really see it as that's originally as a attack vector. I did kind of see it as just sort of a way in. It was one of these things I was studying, and yeah, I kind of always just saw it as sort of like, you know, different strokes for different folks. It was just sort of like, you know, these guys, they don't want full decentralization. They want kind of like a moderated level of governance to where they could sort of push things through like that. And I don't know, like, you know, nowadays I'm kind of seeing Litecoin more and more as something that kind of complements Bitcoin. I don't really see it personally as an attack. I kind of agree with Shinobi that it's something more like Ethereum, where you kind of just form a government, like a real government together, like where I'm not quite sure how decentralized Litecoin is, but I feel like it's a lot more decentralized than a foundation or a group of guys coming together in a room in New York.
Okay, and like to kind of take us back to like the whole issue of like forks, like this is like kind of like the whole meta incentive like framework, like itself presents an attack vector, and I think that kind of directly relates to things like Bcash and SegWit 2x, like especially Bcash. If we look at it, the way that the emergency difficulty adjustment was worked, it's pretty much that throttle to artificially manipulate the issuance schedule. And like the way that this works is it's kind of set up in like that progressive like downward spiral where the difficulty stops, the price dumps, and that kind of just goes further and further down. And I think people really looked at that as just people being stupid. But I think there's a decent possibility that was intentionally engineered in a way that would kind of simultaneously distort Bitcoin's incentives by drawing hash rate whenever it became relatively profitable, but it would also encourage dumping. And I think that like people's like time horizons when they're looking at this are kind of a lot too short, because what this enables them to do is kind of continuously agitate the Bitcoin system while encouraging this dumping that allows them to accumulate. Like incentivize that dumping faster, they can accumulate and concentrate that coin supply, which makes it easier to manipulate that market, which kind of increases the ability with which like it existing just as something parallel to Bitcoin, it can exaggeratedly like distort our system more and more the higher they can push it, like which is directly related to how fast they can accumulate. And like when you take into account like 2x or the potential for multiple systems like this to kind of on a longer time horizon break off while everybody's just laser focused to make a pun on like the most recent fork, they're ignoring the fact that more and more of these breakoffs from Bitcoin sharing its proof of work can be set up in this way, where you can manipulate things on a market level to kind of make it easier to manipulate overall. And that itself is a tool by which to distort Bitcoin. And so you can kind of start, if you can successfully have enough of these over a long enough and get them to the point where they've accumulated enough to manipulate the markets, you can pretty much start playing the miners of Bitcoin like puppets on a string. And you can kind of lead them to specific networks, like split hash rate amongst different networks. And in this way, you can kind of bring the cost down of attacking the main chain just through slowly like leading security away from it.
Yeah, if you can, I mean, so kind of the way that I set that up is that one of these things is going to win, right? Like only one, we can only price things in one asset. So if I was looking at Bitcoin and it was making progress towards that, trying to flood the market with a little bit of confusion in other digital assets would be a good move. So the reason that I see Litecoin and Ethereum and these others as an attack on Bitcoin is that Bitcoin's mission is to destroy everybody else, right? It's like the Highlander thing, right? Like only one person's going to be left standing if it's successful, if it achieves what it wants to achieve. And what it wants to achieve is to be a secure money. Litecoin, you know, like you said, different strokes for different folks, that's fine. And I'm not impugning motives here, but at the end of the day, it was an attempt, even if it was just in the short term, to compete with, right? Even if it was like friendly competition, and it was insecure. And that's the problem that I have. If you create an asset competing with Bitcoin, whether it's SegWit 2x or Litecoin or Ethereum, and it has built-in intentional security flaws where the Bitcoin core devs have already told you this is a security flaw, don't do this, and you do it anyway, and you push it out there as it's a useful asset, I think you've kind of crossed the line to being a bad guy from my perspective. But I kind of, you know, I'm definitely pretty motivated to see Bitcoin succeed here.
Yeah, but there's a category distinction, I think, between a malicious attack and, as you say, the friendly attack, like Litecoin, where there was no intention. We don't have to think with a scarcity paradigm in our minds, right? Where, you know, Litecoin has a market capitalization that subtracts from Bitcoin. Bitcoin, it's an and, you know, it's a you know, what is it? And. So you can keep on adding to the industry. Actually, Bitcoin grows because, as Mr. Hoddle, one of the people in our chat room, often reminds us, eventually the money comes back into Bitcoin. right? People might go off into these alts, but then, you know, if you look at the chart on Polo, the daily chart on pretty much every alt shitcoin on there, they all look the same. All the daily charts look the same. They have some spikes and then they come back down, and they spike up and then they come back down because of some pump or some announcement or whatever. But Bitcoin has to be anti-fragile. It needs these attacks, right, in order to thrive. So in a way, Absolutely. It's like an ecosystem. When you learn about Darwinian evolution, you learn about, you know, you see the nature on the television, and you see the lion, you know, going after the prey, and it looks very violent, but actually it's necessary.
Yeah,
it's very necessary.
I'm certainly not, you know, I don't want to lobby the government to try to prevent this or anything like that, right? Like, I want Bitcoin just to fight it out, and I want it to win. But when we're talking about SegWit 2x, the reason that I bring up those other things that that are competing, right? If you don't want to call it an attack, that's fine. But they're competing, and they're trying to prevent Bitcoin from achieving its goal of being the one money, right? Like, we want to have one secure global money. That's been Bitcoin's mission from the beginning. And something that's insecure that's competing with that is you know, it's going to lose in the long run, but it is an attempt to either slow Bitcoin's adoption, whether that's intentionally the motivation or not, I'm not saying. But when you look at SegWit 2x in that context, then it doesn't seem as odd, right? It seems like just the next logical step in this evolution. So first we tried to break Bitcoin by pushing bad things into it through the bit process. Then we tried altcoins. Now we're trying forks. We tried nice forks. Now we're trying mean forks, right? We tried last minute forks where the developers don't even have time to explain to the market why this is a bad idea, and they just happen, you know, overnight, like with Bitcoin Cash. And I think the next thing that we're probably going to see is we're going to see either a last minute or a little bit of notice fork, right? Because SegWit 2x isn't going to be the last one that we have to deal with. And it's probably going to have some useful components, right? Because and that's why I think it's good to look at it in this context, because when you look at SegWit 2x in that spectrum, it's just laughable, right? It's just the stupidest thing ever, because all it does is it linearly increases the block size, right? If we're at 3 transactions per second or 6 or 26, it doesn't matter. Like, it can't function as a medium of exchange yet. It's still only a store of value until we get to like at least 1,000 or 10,000 transactions per second, right? The step factor there is massive. So it accomplishes absolutely nothing. It doesn't give us any useful features that are of any relevance, right? And it introduces a security bug. But I think what we're going to see after this, just based on the evolution of the past, right? Like Ethereum and Litecoin, at least there was a little bit of sugar in with the poison, right? So I think the next fork that we're going to see is something that is useful, maybe an Ethereum style thing where they claim to have smart contracts on it. Maybe it's something like Mimblewimble that has better privacy. And that would be interesting. I think that, you know, it's not going to work, but it's kind of, it'll be interesting to see if that happens and how that plays out. I think in that case, Bitcoin's going to suck in the good, keep the network, discard the bad, and keep cranking. But this shouldn't feel like something strange that's happening, I guess is what I'm saying. This is a natural next step in these progression of attacks. It's almost like you can map them out.
Really quick though, the Mimblewimble thing, or like any kind of privacy like improvements, I'm not really worried about that. Like, one, because something like Mimblewimble, frankly, I think that these developers doing these things are way too stupid to figure that out. Like, it's like, I just point blank. And two, like a privacy improvement at all. Like, one of the big motivations, and like this has been confirmed through a number of different people who've talked directly to Jihan, is he does not want privacy improvements, because that completely changes the dynamic of the relationship between him and the Chinese government. Like, at this point, he can effectively go, here's the information, or here are the keys to the kingdom. Whereas if we actually made a substantial improvement to fungibility or privacy on chain, he would not be able to do that. And he would no longer have the assumption of security that he does in his business model.
So what are these guys going to do when it becomes harder for these attacks, right? Like, it's obvious that another SegWit 2x isn't going to work next time, and they're going to try something else. So my theory is that, just like with Ethereum, it was a whole lot, you know, it was a good story, right? That there's going to be a good story that goes along with the next fork, right? There's going to be some actual utility attempted at some point, but they're going to stuff in a security vulnerability, right? This time there was a little bit of utility in the sense that they could at least have a story and say, hey, you know, you're going to get much cheaper transactions if we do 2x. That kind of got blown out of the water, but at least that was the narrative. It's easier to sell this deception if there's something of use, but I'm not saying that it would ultimately provide more secure money, because again, then that's the definition of Bitcoin for a lot of us. We don't care, right? If somebody forked Bitcoin and improved the security, we'd be like, oh yeah, that's how it's supposed to happen. We do that every week, right? Like that's all these guys do is write code to make it more secure. But I could see them doing something that had utility, but also had, you know, a significant security vulnerability. You know, Ethereum has utility in the sense that it could support smart contracts in theory, but it also doesn't have a cap, and they were also going to do proof of stake. And incidentally, the difficulty adjustment is based on, you know, Vitalik sleep patterns. But there at least was a story and some utility there. So I think we're going to see more of that.
Yeah, well, I think they've kind of already started shooting themselves in the dick, so to say, on that regard. I mean, if we look back to things like Classic and Bitcoin Unlimited, like a huge part of the attempts to legitimize that were like, look, we have flex trans, like SegWit the right way, or XThin. We did compact blocks better, but it's riddled with bugs that crashed the entire like subset of the network running that. Like, and it's like they've already kind of burned the bridge of being able to legitimately say we have something that's an improvement, because they've already kind of tried that. Like, we're doing what core devs are doing except better, and it's blown up in their face every time. So like before they've even gotten to this like hostile fork attack vector, they've already kind of burned their credibility to try and like iterate on that in a way where it's like, no, look, we really have an improvement.
Yeah, I guess
right.
I'm coming from the perspective that these are going to get worse because Bitcoin's going to matter more, right? I think I heard a story that Iran, you know, you never know whether these are what the validity is to this stuff. But imagine a situation where Iran uses Bitcoin to become the national currency because they need to get around U.S. sanctions, right? Those scenarios, we haven't even seen that stuff yet. We've seen China ban Bitcoin, right? We've seen a big player say, oh, you're not going to be able to use it. Wait until something like that starts to happen. Like the party hasn't even started yet. Like we're going to see attacks on Bitcoin that are funded that make Jihan look like, you know, somebody selling lemonade down the street.
Yeah, there's a lot of speculation there.
Janine, you had a question from a user yesterday that posted.
Yeah, I received a question a few days ago, but I saw it yesterday, and they were mainly asking me, but I thought I would share it here in case you guys had more extensive answers. But they were basically asking, what are the chances that either Bitcoin Cash or SegWit2x would launch a large-scale spam attack on Bitcoin, and they wanted to know whether or not that would be effective in pushing people onto either of those chains, mostly Bitcoin Cash.
That's something that I keep hearing come up whenever people are talking about this whole thing and the market manipulation.
This is interesting, right? Because of course we now have Bitcoin Cash, and we're now going to have 3 SHA-2 coins, effectively, at least big ones. I know there are other ones, but you know, ones that have a good presence in the market and a high market cap automatically. So they fought the UTXO set. So what are the dynamics there?
Yeah, I think we will. I think up to this point, we've seen a lot of spam attacks, and they've been pretty well timed. At least they've been. You can see the rationale for the timing, right? And I guess I'd be surprised if we didn't see a spam attack, right? Because when I look at Bitcoin, I look at it as a good thing for a lot of people and a bad thing for a small number of really powerful people, right? And so if I was one of those folks, why wouldn't you do a spam attack? It's not prohibitively expensive, right? Bitcoin does have I don't want to say weaknesses, but there's always design trade-offs in any design. And one of the things that you can do right now, and it's getting more expensive, right? Over time, this problem will get better and better. But one of the things that you can do right now is you can fill up the block sizes, right? And it's not insanely expensive to do that. So I don't know why they wouldn't. I certainly would.
Yeah, I was actually looking back in the history, and I realized that I thought it was kind of funny when there was a large-scale spam attack going on. I think at the end of 2015, Jeff Garzik was actually behind. That was when they put in a minimum fee requirement that a transaction had to have, so much fee, and that was to stop that spam attack. And so I thought that was interesting, and this whole context about fees being too high, and yeah, I thought it was interesting Jeff Garzik was doing that.
No, that's exactly right. I mean, that's exactly what's going on, right? If the part of the thing that's going on with the block size, trying to keep it low, it's not just about latency. It's also about making it costly to put transactions in there. And we have the thing that's so silly about this is we have solutions where a transaction on the blockchain can be really, really expensive, but users will not have any significant costs, right? Because with stuff like Lightning or sidechains, you could have thousands or tens of thousands of transactions all batched up in one transaction. If it costs $25, great, nobody cares, and it's really, really hard to attack the network now. So, yeah, I think you're spot on to observe that connection.
Yeah, and real quick too. Sorry, Rick, but we had another question from the channel. They wanted to know what your feelings are on how coordinated like the 2x attack is. Like, do you think it's mostly people who've kind of just been duped or like misled, or if there is like pretty much what's the scale of like any kind of intentional?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's a really good question. I don't think it's a very sophisticated attack, but I think it's relatively coordinated. So I guess I'm kind of picking a middle ground there, right? Like there's real money that's going on. There's real spend that's happening here. You don't get a bunch of CEOs to jump on board, right, without spending some real cash to convince these guys that you've got the juice that it takes to destroy the network and then reward them for it, right? So there's something significant. On the other hand, man, it's just insanely ridiculous. Like, there's one developer that worked on this thing. He could barely change a couple lines of code, and then he launched an altcoin, right, like the next day. So that's laughable. And I kind of have a tendency, like, this is where I go, man, does that mean it's not a well-funded thing? Like there's no government backing here, or is this just the DMV, right? Like, is this just how the governments of the world, they're pretty effective at lies and deception and market manipulation. But you ask those guys to write an iPhone app, and it's a $300,000-$500,000 no bid contract, and it never works. So I don't know. I mean, I think it would be wise for all of us to assume that, I mean, if you buy my thesis, right, and it's not my thesis, it's actually a guy named Ludwig von Mises came up with it, I think, initially, but that may even go back further. But the thesis is that money has to be one thing, right, because it's a unit of account. And there's this progression from it being a store of value to being a medium of exchange, and then it being a unit of account. And from my perspective, I think that we're in store of value stage right now. It's a great store of value. It's a shitty medium of exchange. It's awful as a medium of exchange, right? If you tried to use this on a regular basis, you're going to be hit with fees. You're going to be constantly asking people, hey man, you want to accept Bitcoin? That's not a good medium of exchange, right? But at some point after the store of value becomes so popular that everybody owns it, then it's time for it to become a medium of exchange. That's how money's evolved. So between now and then, we don't really need to worry about throughput. We just need to worry about somehow surviving the gauntlet of attacks that we're gonna see. And I don't think it's at all hypothetical or theoretical to say if we try to create a new money, every government of the world will try to destroy it. Because there's been, the cypherpunk movement has attempted this a couple times, and there's been, different iterations and different attempts, things like eGold and other things that have tried to do this, and somebody's always ended up in jail or missing, right? So it's not like you really have to put on the tinfoil hat to say, if you try to create an alternative to a government's main power source, you're going to have problems. I think that's a given.
Right, and that's like something we're talking about, this spam attack and the amount of people on this 2x project and the overwhelming like business support behind it. It does make me wonder, and like you're saying, I don't think it's too high highly to speculate that there's might be some sort of government behind this and some sort of state sponsor behind it. If not now, then certainly something in the future where that sort of attack can take place. And yeah, it just really it makes me wonder, like, what could happen if like a state sponsor doesn't care about the money they're spending and burning to dump the price, and all that back and forth and market manipulation. It just yeah, it makes me worry that there might be some sort of sponsor behind it, and like what the outcome of that could be. And I feel like that could start to make, you know, like you're saying, it could drive up fees, it could spam the network to where people are saying, well, I need to make some sort of payment. How am I going to do that? And they don't want to use Ethereum because they don't trust that sort of foundation. And maybe you know, I don't want to come off as a big Litecoin supporter, but I just feel like that's maybe like where a point where somebody's like, well, I need a medium of exchange for this interim while this is going on. And I feel like, you know, that's sort of like where that might play in.
Yeah, but it's not really a good medium of exchange. Like if I wanted to send you money right now, unless you're one of the very few Litecoin users, then I have to go through the whole process to send you money, but I have to do it to an exchange, right? And then I have to get that Litecoin and send it to you. And then you have to go through that whole process to get it back to dollars. The only time that Litecoin would be useful as a medium of exchange, right? That's step 2. We're all competing for step 1, right? Which is store of value. But the only time it would make sense, and that's why when we get the order of the sort of economic evolution of money out of whack, certain things look really attractive, but they're not, right? And it's not attractive to try to send you money through Litecoin, no matter how fast the block times are, until I have reasonable confidence that you're already a Litecoin holder, right? You already want more Litecoin, you already accept it. So that's years away. And I think, you know, by the time that we get to that point, we're going to be fine. And that's why I'm not too worried about like spam attacks with SegWit2x and the stuff they're trying right now. Because even if they slow down the network, right, even like with what Bitcoin Cash did, where we had these periods where block times were really low, it didn't matter. And the reason it didn't matter is that people aren't using it as a medium of exchange. And the reason they're not is that not everybody owns it yet. But what's really sweet about that is that that's a problem that we can put off until the game's over. If we can wait until everybody owns it before we have to worry about transaction speed and all that sort of stuff, man, it's a done deal, right? I mean, imagine everybody in the world being a Bitcoin holder and then having to worry about this stuff. That's the situation that we're in. So as long as nobody can steal your Bitcoin and you can get your hands on, you know, you can buy Bitcoin. Obviously, we need a certain amount of throughput to do those real basic sort of holder transactions. We're going to be fine.
Yeah, and I mean, to kind of wind us back to like the issue of like whether this is the DMV or not. Like, I kind of want to like paint a narrative from like my point of view, and like Mike Hearn is like within this the only person I will make the like a positive claim that I am certain of this. Like everyone else is speculation. But to kind of draw back to like what Chris mentioned when we first got started with Mike Hearn's proposal for red lists. It's not like a blacklist per se, but like stolen coins tied to illegal activity would be put on a list. And then essentially, as somebody engaging in legal transactions, you would be required to kind of report to your government, like declare you have these coins and how you got them if you ever like get your hands on coins on this list. And now see, to like kind of like stretch from there up to like the present day, like after that, we had like, or not after that, a little before that, Gavin like had his whole like he went to go talk to the CIA, and then Satoshi disappeared. But if we kind of follow through to like when Craig Wright first got into the ecosystem, like Gavin vouched for him. And like an aspect of that I feel like is almost totally forgotten at the time is like during that time period, Gavin and a lot of others were making a very concerted effort to spread this notion or narrative that if Satoshi were ever to come back, he should just be in charge of development again. Like it should just be okay. Like he's in charge now. He's calling the shots. He's the committer of code. Like he decides what goes in and what doesn't. And obviously, he started his deranged gigablocks, everything can go on chain, a billion people nonsense. Now, fast forward, or no, wait, hold on, timetables. I think actually go back a little bit to like 2014 or maybe around there in 2015, the Chain Anchor program out of MIT Labs. was effectively a second layer proposal to layer an ID system on top of Bitcoin that would tag like government IDs to your coins on the chain. And it even came with the proposal to kind of bribe miners and economically incentivize them to slowly transition that list of like unknown or illegal coins from that red list into a full-on blacklist, and only mine like transactions that are tied to this government ID layer. And then if we look at like that in combination with like this narrative to put Satoshi back in charge, where he would ramp up the block size and exponentially exacerbate like mining centralization, to try and apply something like Chain Anchor would be a lot simpler because there's less people to deal with. It's a lot easier to approach people and get them on board. And then the kind of cherry on top is Jeff Garzik and Block's investment in, and not only its efforts in Ethereum and kind of trying to push that other alternative or attack vector, he invested in the Scry chain analytics company, which is the information pot that you would like need to start applying something like Chain Anchor, which would have been reinforced by like this putting air quotes Satoshi back in control to lay the groundwork to make it easier, which calls back to Mike Hearn's like red list proposal. And now Mike Hearn, he worked for a GCHQ contractor before he got his job at Google. And when he left Google to work on Bitcoin, shortly after, it was found out that Google was hacked by the NSA in their inter-data center connections with exploits from the code that Mike Hearn worked on. And so if you kind of like open your time horizon and stitch all these things together, like we've been dealing with that bumbling DMV level organized attempt for the past 3 or 4 years. Like that's what's going on.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you think about what would happen if they were able to pull that off, right? If there was able to be whitelists and blacklists on money, it would just make Bitcoin useless, right? Everybody would go back to cash US dollars, right? Because you don't want to end up with Bitcoin and not be sure if you're going to be able to spend it, right? That just totally destroys the fungibility. So even though it has other attributes that are good and would make it be the last man standing, right? Would make it become the new money that would replace government currencies, that would gimp it enough to where it actually wouldn't be worth using over US dollars, like that one change. So it's not like we would end up with a Bitcoin that had whitelists and blacklists, right? We will just end up with some digital asset that's not useful as money. And
but you see, I'm not so sure about that.
It has no other value either. Right? Like if
I'm
it's
not
money,
really so sure about that. Like if we kind of look at like the fact that the Federal Reserve even exists, or just the amount of like stupid narratives that you could put in people's heads. I mean, if they were able to put Bitcoin in that kind of state, wouldn't it be in a lot of government's interest to just manipulate and pump that to draw people in? I mean, you've effectively got a giant database tagging every economic transaction, every person on earth using this does, tied to their ID, but in a way where only you actually have that database or the resources to draw connections. I mean, like
what would be the difference between that and the digital US dollar we have now, though? I mean, yeah, it might be
there's
good market.
Much more individual traceability. Like, I mean, that's been my worry about Bitcoin from day one, is if you can kind of shuttle people into it despite like undermining its value structure until it has enough momentum to keep moving forward, it's pretty much the most nightmarish dystopian surveillance database ever possible. Like it's every single thing in the whole social graph of connections between all those economic interactions. And like, if you can do that, like that's a nightmare.
Yeah, I think that especially if you could make it global, right? Like the US dollar is the global reserve currency, but if you could pull that off and we could have a global currency that was controlled by, a government or a coalition of governments, yeah, that would be worse.
Well,
I think we almost have that now inside countries, right? Like every latte I've bought for the past 20 years is, indexed and ready to go.
Yes, but the problem is that data is dirty right now. Like if a government wants to know what latte you bought last Wednesday, it has to go to a private bank. They've got policies and procedures. They've got a legal department. They need to go to court. They need to get a warrant. You don't need that with the blockchain.
Yeah, no, that's not how it works. I mean, we know from the Snowden leaks that at least in some of the major technology companies like Google, that there's a direct constant feed, right? There is no Google, can you please look at this form and send me the data? That's not how it works. There's literally, I mean, AT&T back in I want to say 2003 or something like that. The pipe that came in out of the ocean went into a building and split in two directions. It went through one wall and directly into the NSA's feed. So every piece of data, and that was a little bit more dirty possibly, but these, I mean, that's what these guys do, right? They don't go through $400 billion or something a year.
Yeah, but like there's a difference in the data sets though. Like the current way of like the things are done through banks, like you have that kind of that tree of connections at the backbones, but like everything done in cash or any other thing, it's like all the spider webs between those root branches are just, they're not there. They're missing
cash,
all
I
of
agree.
that
Cash
connection.
is different. I'm thinking that for most people, they're not using cash for much. I mean, I'm not going to say that this is not an intelligent play, right? If they can push cash out, if they could use digital currencies as a part of pushing cash out, that would be good to go. But if it existed, what I was saying before is not if it gets co-opted by a government. I agree. It could be used for even more evil. But if it existed without being propped up by a government and they were able to make that one change, it becomes useless, right? Like nobody would want to use it unless they were essentially forced to, right? So
but that's my worry though, is like, you know, at the maximum tinfoil level, that ever since they started looking at that's been what they wanted to do with it. Like they don't want to kill it. They want to turn it into that and then force everybody into it.
right, but the way that you would do that, I mean, SegWit2x would be a great way to do that, right? If you can make it vulnerable, right? If you can make it something, this is what I would do if I was sitting in a room and people were saying, how do we break Bitcoin, and SegWit2x was on the table. I'd say that's a great idea. If we can push the block size up to a dangerous level, miners will become centralized, and then we can do what we always do. We'll just show up with the SWAT team and tell them what to do. So that, I mean, I agree that that's definitely whether that's happening at a state sponsored level or not, or whether it's just a few scam artists with deep pockets. I don't know. I mean, Bitcoin Cash has been propped up on the market way longer than I thought it would. I mean, the volume that moves on that thing every day is really high. And I don't think that, I guess I don't believe that the deception has been as effective as it would have to be in order to prop that up for so long. So I feel like there's just a lot of money pouring into that thing. I don't know if Jihan's got pockets that are that deep or not, but
I think a lot of it's been him.
You know, regardless of who's doing it, these are
Satoshi said that he controls a lot of the mining on that. Craig Wright, sorry, I keep calling him Satoshi.
Right. Yeah. So I mean, Bitcoin is either going to remain secure, and I think it will, or we're going to fall for the narrative. And but you know, at the end of the day, even if SegWit2x was successful, like from a selfish investor standpoint, I don't care about, you know, children starving in Africa. I don't care. I hope SegWit2x is an effective attack, right? I hope they get 90% of the hash power, and I hope they get 95% of the investors, because what that means is that my 1 Bitcoin just became 20 Bitcoins, and eventually you suckers will figure out your folly, right? And I will be laughing all the way to the bank. So I'm okay with these attacks. I think in the long run, it's going to be fine. I think the best advice that I could give people is try to figure out who the experts are now, right? Try to figure out the difference between a CSW and an atom back. If you can't figure that out, you should probably get out of Bitcoin, because it's really obvious, right? And if you can figure out who those experts and those trustworthy people are now, when the attacks get more sophisticated, maybe they won't, maybe I'm just being paranoid, but I think that there has been a trend at more and more sophisticated attacks, more and more effective attacks. I think we're going to see more of it. But if you know the people in the space that can be trusted, then you're going to be all right.
Yeah, I think that's a really important part, is because, you know, a lot of people come in the space through different angles, and they might hear, you know, maybe they got it through Jeff Garzik or Craig Wright, and you know, they said they immediately take sides, and it's hard to get people to understand that, you know, you're not coming from a spot where you're trying to deceive them. And yeah, it's definitely something where I just hope it's going to play out right, man. I just hope that, you know, we'll get on the other side of this. Luckily, tools like you are developing, I think that's just going to absolutely help try and distinguish what's Bitcoin quicker. And, you know, I appreciate everything you're doing there with that. And hopefully we can resolve what is Bitcoin here shortly.
Thanks, man. Yeah, in the long run, it's going to be fine, right? Like the genie's out of the bottle. Humanity knows how to build something that is so secure nobody can steal it. That's not going to go away. It might take 50 years instead of 10 years. That would be sad. A lot of people would needlessly die in the process. But this is an inevitability now. We are going to have secure money. It's going to happen. You know, just like once electricity was invented, even if we all got atomic bombed back to the Stone Age, one person that remembers that there's something funny going along with rubbing two pieces of wire together, we'd end up with electricity eventually a lot faster. So I think it's going to be all right.
Yeah, man. Like you're saying, you know, we got a lot of confident guys working on this.
All right, Monkey, what do you want to do?
Well, I guess we want to touch a little on the inspiration for this hilariously epic meme.
Oh, do you like our meme today? This is Rick's work, collaborative effort, but Rick is the one that does all the hard work. He does all the hard work in GIMP, open source software. And just to remind you, on the topic of open source software, this show is brought to you by Bitcoin Mumble Dragon's Den. Yes, the infamous Dragon's Den. And you can reach us in the Mumble chat room, which the link is in the description below. It's at the very top there. And that is free open source chat software. You can come in, you can just speak on text if you want, or you can come on voice if you want as well. That's okay too. So yeah, the inspiration, let me see if I can find, yeah, so here we go. Let's get it started. Who wants to start with this? Oh, it's a gift that keeps on giving.
Well, long and short of it is, yeah, Ethereum had a contract that functioned as a library for Parity, which was drawn from to actually make multi-sig wallets work. And well, there was a bug in it that allowed it to be treated as a wallet if a method for it was ran, and it deleted all the stuff in the library. So now all of the Parity multi-sig wallets on the Ethereum network just don't work because the contract that they all depended on deleted itself.
What?
But I mean, this is I'm going to go back to a quote from Vlad Zafimir, interviewed by Krista Rose on Bitcoin Uncensored, where he directly stated that the most complex smart contract Ethereum can implement right now is a multi-sig wallet for tokens. And this is the second time now that this has been fucked up. The first time, your funds were stealable. This time, all of them were just completely broken.
So I just want to say that we are in solidity with DevOps 199. I mean, solidarity with DevOps 199. And just power to you, man. Digs out for DevOps. I think he's a great guy. And if anyone from Ethereum tries to sue him, we're all going to do a fundraiser on behalf of Whalepool, on behalf of Bitcoin Mumble, where we're going to defend you, man. Good job. I accidentally killed it. Brilliant.
That should have been our title. Digs out for DevOps.
Yeah, Dick's out for DevOps 199, showing solidarity there, and nobody gets to touch him. All right, leave him alone.
Right,
damn Bitcoin maximalists.
I got a lot of respect for this, man.
They're just going to blame it on Bitcoin maximalists. I bet you. They're going to say he's a Bitcoin
I'm surprised we haven't seen Bruce Wanker show up yet.
Oh, yeah.
Oh my God, Bruce Wanker.
What was the result of the, has anyone checked the poll recently that Samson Mao was doing? What's the result of the poll that we took about whether he should be arrested or?
One sec.
I still need to vote on that one.
I did not see that.
Yeah, I imagine most parody people didn't.
There we go. So LOL almost won. Oh, it's still 19 hours left. Oh, I'm giving people, because I've voted on it, and I voted that he should be rewarded. So I asked a question. He was actually replying to me. Samson was, and because I posted this, and I was in the Gitter chat room where all the Ethereum devs, and this chap Anthony was sort of laying into DevOps, and obviously I'm like, well, dicks out for DevOps, you know, solidity with DevOps, and he's like laying into him, and he was going on about how it's like, how is it possible to accidentally call a kill and, like, you know, wreck, you know, all this money? Like, how did you accidentally do that? And he, you know, DevOps, to his credit, you know, he's timestamping shit in the blockchain. He's saying, look, I'm not malicious. I'm not a Bitcoin maximalist. I'm not trying to like wreck your shit or anything. So I simply asked the question, like, should DevOps 199 be arrested or awarded with the Parity bug bounty, which many of you may not know about? But let me show you what it is. It's basically a bug bounty that they introduced, I believe, after the vulnerability, the previous one back in July, not even that long ago, where they would give a reward, I think, of 107 ETH. Is that?
I have a question. Is this stored in a multi-sig address?
Yeah, it's probably been locked. It's probably lost in this whole thing. But yeah, so then Samson did an actual poll. And only 7% said he should be arrested, 47 said he should be rewarded, and 46 went with LOL. So, yeah.
You just got the LOL for rewarded.
Democracy in action. He should get rewarded.
You know, all this thing reminds me so much of the DAO hack. And, like, you remember that bug was posted like a few days before the actual hack. It's like they tried to actually get, I don't know if they were trying to get a bounty, but they were trying to let people know about it. So, you know, I don't know, how are you supposed to go about letting these guys know that there's a bug in their system?
Well, yeah, as soon as you tell them, you know, then it's out, and then you're wrecked. But it's just a gift that keeps on giving. Ethereum is just a joke. I don't even know why the price isn't tanking right now. Price is actually relatively stable around 293 last I checked before coming on air. And it dumped a little bit on the news, but not very much. I'm just like, is anyone going to actually trust Ethereum enough to make a transaction? I get, yeah, trade on an exchange with it, sure, but are you really going to take your chances putting your money into an Ethereum wallet after all these calamities they've been through?
Bro, God Vitalik brought us the brain computer to usher in the singularity. You dare doubt him?
Yeah, well, I also want to point out, apparently Gavin Wood, did we already mention this, that Gavin Wood was one of the largest, shall we call it, losers in this, that something $90 million worth of Ethereum that got locked up, which is quite a significant chunk of the total amount, I think.
Can we not call Gavin Wood a loser, please? He is not a loser. He's a top man and a personal friend of mine. And but was that his personal money, or was that like company money, Parity money? What?
I'm not sure, actually.
Yeah, I don't know about that. I just saw it in the technical post that someone said that Gavin had lost a significant amount. And I don't mean loser as in, like, you know, bad person. I just mean...
Well, we're going to have to see, because there's a lot of raving on Reddit about rolling back the chain already.
Oh, no. Oh, this is great. This brings
oh, yeah,
back
guys. Yeah, if you want...
Why not? I mean, it's what I don't understand is why people are still interested in it, right? Like, we've already... They have proven that they just have a big, slow database that they can change when they want to. How's that interesting? I mean, I could build something for you guys that supports smart contracts and is a lot faster without a blockchain, right? Like, let's just do that. Let's ICO that bad boy.
Well, they could do the ICO on EOS if they wanted to, you know, make sure that the funds were safe, I guess, and then use that to repatriate the funds to the people who lost out in this recent exploit, Shani.
Do you guys think that a lot of what's going on, I haven't really expressed this to anybody else, so it might be a stupid idea, but is a lot of the ICO money coming from people that are in other countries that are just having a hard time getting good data on what's happening? Like, is it? I don't know if anybody's looked into like the volume.
It's coming from plebs. It's coming from plebs. We've interviewed somebody already. We have a lady in the chat room who owns a bar in San Francisco, and she came on and just made a bit of a fool of herself, going, well, it's just a money grab. You know, I put money in at one price, I get money out of another price. I bought Ethereum at $12, it went up to $200, and I made lots of money. And it's just money. That's it. That's it. Speculation.
Yeah, I do always underestimate how much people like to make really bad gambles. And I mean, I think you definitely get better odds at Vegas, but you got to get on a plane. So, you know,
Yeah,
maybe,
so
maybe this,
want to
you
make
know,
one.
if it's $50 here, $100 there, that's fine. And that can add up quick. So I guess I don't care if that's what it is.
So I want to make one correction. So the 90 million supposedly that Gavin lost is actually the money that he had for his ICO Polkadot. So that's what, it wasn't personal funds, it was the ICO funds.
And honestly, man, I wouldn't be surprised if it's like a lot of misinformed people, because just getting articles from Russia or getting articles from Iran or anywhere, you know, there's a lot of mistranslation, miscommunication along the way. I could definitely see, like, you know, these plebs being plebs because they're misinformed.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I mean, I'm
definitely motivated to try to do stuff like this show and help in any way I can get out the word of what's a scam and what's not. But I guess I was just curious if you guys had some insight. That's interesting. I hadn't really thought about specifically where it was coming from.
Yeah, so I can. We can actually, because Shinobi and I we grew up, I guess, in the catacombs of the chat rooms around in the Bitcoin space. And it was Monkey. I don't know when you started. I mean, I was back in 2012 in the BTC Trollbox and Bitcoin Talk, but then we migrated over to TradingView, and then from TradingView chat, a guy called Flibber set up with a group of other people. Also, I believe Beauty Bubble was involved, and BTC VIX as well, set up the famous Whale Club TeamSpeak. That went through various community forks. It split off and people splintered, but those basically are frequented by all of the people that you're talking about in this space. And we have seen many generations come along, right? Early on, it was like innovators, developers. I wasn't a developer, but I worked with computers all day, and I was an IT guy, and I was sysadmin and did, you know, special effects and graphics. And then other people would also be kind of, you know, in the periphery, either coders or IT people, I would say, for the most part. And then the next wave came in, and those were people who knew a lot about tech. They knew enough to be a bit dangerous, right? In a conversation, they could sound like they knew what they were talking about, but maybe they didn't really. If you put them in front of a terminal, they'd be like, oh, fuck, I don't like shell, I'm a civilian, give me a GUI. You know, those types of people. And they would sort of be very good at translating into common parlance, like, you know, for the layperson, like, okay, this is what this technical thing really means. So you also had Let's Talk Bitcoin that started around summer of 2013. You had Andreas Antonopoulos, who's now turned into a bit of an institution within the industry, and you had all these people. And then after those groups of people came along, you had the speculators, just people who, sure, they got Bitcoin, they got it, grokked it, they understood the politics of it, they understood the importance of it, but they were really there to increase their net worth. And here's the distinction between that group and the group that followed them, the group now that go into the ICOs. The first group of speculators were really there to accumulate more Bitcoins because they believed in Bitcoin longer term. Whereas the people that came afterwards had a tendency to not really give a fuck about the underlying. They were just there to increase their dollar capital. Right. So they didn't really care about Bitcoin. They were just using it as a vehicle to make more dollars. And sure, there were some of those early on as well. But what I'm talking tendencies, I'm not being categorical here. I'm just saying that that's what we saw. So now in what's called now Whale Pool, which is the same as the same community, different name, you now have total noobs, haven't been around, you know, probably some of them in there have been, you know, online every day for maybe 10 hours a day at least, since March, let's say, when Bitcoin was actually back down at what, $900? Can you believe it? But it feels like such a long time, because Bitcoin has this weird time dilation property. You go into it and a week is like a month, and a month feels like, 6 months sometimes. And so I've sort of got to know these guys over the last few months as hanging out in the chat room, and I forget that they don't even remember like the drop from 260 down to 50. They don't remember, going up to 1200 of the Willy bot. They don't remember the MT Gox fiasco. They don't remember any of that. I mean, they only hear about it. It's all hearsay. It's like legendary, passed down by word of mouth, Homeric, almost poetic kind of passing down of information. Oh yeah, did you hear about the famous MT Gox? Oh yeah, I lost money in that. We end up having those conversations, and they ask these, really naive questions, and you get the sense that a lot of these new people, really, yeah, like I say, just want to increase their dollar balance. Don't really care about the underlying longer term.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. One of the things that I think Andreas has said this, but there's just so many people that, I don't know, he's probably said it better than this and not this harsh, but there's so many people that are just basically children because their governments have prevented them from being able to make any bad investments, right? Like when I was 10, I think I made my first bad investment. But a lot of people have only been able to make investments into public companies. They're not accredited. They give their money to somebody that, is a broker that gives it to somebody else that eventually invests in a company. And all they know is like terms like diversification. They've never experienced sort of taking risks and knowing that it really hurts when you make a bad choice. So I guess this has to be that opportunity for a lot of those guys. So that's unfortunate, but yeah, it makes sense.
Well, there's been a lot of room to learn. I'll tell you, like somebody who came in not too long ago and, saw Bitcoin for different properties. And then whenever I was able to, make a little bit of money with it, USD, I was like, oh, wow, there's something, I didn't really quite expect to make money with it. It did make me a little bit more interested in it, but it was up to me to sort of go out and find the atom backs, like you're talking about, somebody that really was going to educate me as far as what this tech was and how it's making you money, because I do feel like a lot of these people that are coming in, they do see that their USD is increasing and they don't understand the tech. They just understand they're making money.
That's actually really encouraging. So when you first started playing around with cryptocurrencies and investing a little bit of, say, play money, right? You probably weren't taking the money that you weren't going to be able to buy groceries that week, and throwing it into this stuff. You didn't really understand it. But then after you saw that it was working and you kind of experimented with it, then you had the motivation to go out and seek out experts.
Well, it was definitely interesting. It was like I was sort of wrapped up in what is money, and then I knew Bitcoin was definitely some form of money. And so I was just trying to learn it, and I was getting, small amounts, like you're saying, just like, basically dollars worth, just to send back and forth and figure out what I could do with it. And I'd set up a couple of exchange accounts whenever the ETC Ethereum fork happened, and I was already kind of plugged in to where I was like, well, maybe I could take advantage of this situation. And I did, and it did make me a little bit of money, to where I was like, wow, this is like something where you could really clean up on. And it just made me that much more interested, to where I was already kind of going on the route of figuring out what it was, but that one definitely pushed me to where it's like, okay, now you've got to figure this out, because you could make something out of this for real.
Yeah, that's really cool. That actually makes me feel better about some people that are going to win and some people that are going to lose on stuff like ICOs. It's just tuition.
Yeah, hopefully they'll learn that.
Yeah, that's really cool. Thanks.
I think because the way that I approach every other cryptocurrency besides Bitcoin is that it's an experiment. And I think that's one of, like, especially as we're seeing now with Ethereum, because we had warnings from Vladimir saying that this is an experiment. You should not be treating this as, critical infrastructure, because it has a long way to go. And I really wish that more people in Ethereum had heeded his warning and not, gone full speed into this, because that's another thing Andreas said, was that, a lot of these things, like Ethereum, could have ended up being great, but the money went in too fast and you ended up blowing up the rocket because you didn't pay attention to the rocket science first. So the reason that I treat Bitcoin differently is I feel Bitcoin is the cryptocurrency so far. It's the only one that's really proven itself. And of course, Bitcoin still has a long way to go too. But in comparison to every other cryptocurrency, I think there's a big difference that, you know, I'm open to using other cryptocurrencies, but when it comes to, you know, something that I use as sound money, Bitcoin is the only one that has fulfilled that promise. And yeah, I'm looking forward to watching all the other experiments, but we should be clear, you know, from the outset that until they prove themselves, this is all experiments and it could go wrong at any second. So we have to be really careful.
Yeah, yeah, totally. You know, this is like really fascinating for me because when I first really got interested in Bitcoin, I'd already been studying economics like obsessively for about 5 years, and I had about 20 years of computer security background. So I dropped in kind of out of the middle of nowhere, but I recognized certain names. Like I knew who Adam Back was. I knew who Nick Szabo was. Like these guys had done things that spilled outside of, you know, certainly outside of cryptocurrencies. So it is interesting to see just the path that you guys took, that it was kind of the novelty or the curiosity that drew you in first. You started kind of almost like you heard about this new weird metal and you wanted to play with it a little bit, and then you got more interested in things like economics and you know, why one is more useful than the other. So that's very cool.
Yeah, I think it plays real well also into like just, you know, like I know that you know you have the stance where like all these other coins are attack vectors, and I can totally understand that, but it does bring in these people to where they maybe, you know, like a portion of them are kind of like myself, where they're, you know, they're not really there just for money, and there's like a bigger thing that they're trying to figure out, and it'll eventually lead to Bitcoin. And so hopefully, yeah, more of these people, you know, after this, whatever happens here in the near future, with, you know, there'll be some learners coming on the other side of this to where hopefully they'll come to the right coin.
Yeah, they will eventually. I mean, I honestly think the kind of my most optimistic part about this is that it just seems inevitable, right? Like humanity has always ended up using the best money that was available to them at any point in time, right? If it's seashells or if it's gold or whatever asset was around, it didn't take very long for humanity to converge on that asset. And I just feel like that's an inevitable outcome of the market. I mean, unless we can get to the point where we're you know, cloning people or changing the genetic makeup of people so that they're more docile and submissive, which would obviously be a nightmare. As long as we're still dealing with man, I think we're going to be all right.
Right. Most people use logic.
Okay.
Right. Or
so Monkey.
pain, right? Like when they make bad investment decisions, it hurts, and when they make better ones, it's better, and that has, you know, the invisible hand of the market sort of concept, right? It has almost guaranteed outcomes in certain ways.
Yeah, you learn real quick when it costs money.
Yep, absolutely. Very cool.
Okay. Monkey, what's next?
A supercharged condensed monkey rant.
Okay.
This is one of the talks I highly recommend everybody watch from Scaling Bitcoin. It was Nick Szabo and Elaine. And this is actually something that Chris brought up, I believe, on our very first episode when we were talking about the Blockstream satellite, where pretty much like ham radio operators or different radio stations can actually skip a radio signal off the top layer of the atmosphere. And pretty much Elaine and Nick have done a little more research into how we can actually propagate Bitcoin information over radio waves. And one of the key factors he was looking into is effectively the type of range and signal reach you can get based on different environmental conditions. For instance, there's actually a lower layer of the atmosphere that during the day is charged by sunlight and radiation. So it kind of acts as like a layer of interference before the signal can reach the ionosphere and actually bounce down back to Earth. And so they're kind of playing around with the different ranges and the different bit rate in terms of throughput that you can actually get utilizing things like this. And they actually did a couple, if you look at the video, if you can kind of jump around, Chris, there were some heat maps in there And they actually kind of show the type of signal intensity you can expect based on like the different signal amplitudes, the different frequencies you're using. And they're looking at the notion of kind of having like geographically dispersed radio relay stations, both for relaying block data and also for in kind of the lower end case of like a low bit rate due to like range or potentially atmospheric interference. Even in worst case situations, use this to just relay a single transaction or receive simple SPV proofs. Like let's say you're in a country like China that completely clamps down on Bitcoin. Well, using a radio relay, you would still be able to have, at a very low bitrate throughput, the ability to propagate your transaction or get simple SPV proofs to have some degree of certainty that your transaction was actually confirmed by the network. And one of the most interesting things they were looking at is, like, obviously the radio relays are kind of like the physical layer of networking like this, but they were also looking at the construction of the data frame that you would actually have to structure the data digitally so it can be pulled out of the radio signal and reconstructed as actual information on a computer. And they were actually looking at essentially dynamically sizing the frame and the data that it puts through based on like interference or lower bit rate throughput on like different geographical areas. But effectively, they're looking at a very dynamic way in which we can propagate Bitcoin information that's not dependent on the internet. Like I was saying during that first episode when we were talking about the Blockstream satellite, this is a huge thing. Like if this is actually developed properly and set up in a way where people can build these things and actually operate them at low cost without too high of a knowledge requirement to actually get it and keep it running, 5 years from now, we could potentially be in a position where the Bitcoin network could have the entire internet shut off and just keep running. And I mean, to be able to get another physical network or means by which we can propagate the data, at that point, like it might sound kind of cocky, but Bitcoin is literally unstoppable at that point. Like if you look, like Nick specifically mentioned in this talk, if you look at Soviet attempts to kind of interfere with American radio broadcasts into Soviet territory, it literally took them thousands of radio stations to completely interfere with the signal everywhere. And like everybody knows, the Bitcoin network and its peer-to-peer structure, all you need is that one good connection somewhere to maintain the common state amongst the whole network. So this is actually like, this is Bitcoin no longer dependent on the internet. If this line of research is actually followed through to the end and put together in an operational way, like this is amazing.
It's totally amazing. This is the stuff that the people that have been working on this stuff for a while are just blown away by, right? Like nobody's really excited about, I don't know, changing the hash algorithm or something like that. But this is game-changing stuff, especially given the fact, like that whole conversation we had before, like maybe we don't have state actors yet, but we should expect to at some point in the future. This is, and obviously China shutting down Bitcoin and making the moves that they made, that's a state actor trying to disrupt Bitcoin. So it's getting more and more reasonable to say that this is gonna happen, right? And guys like Nick Szabo, they're not just trying to hawk an ICO. They've been doing this stuff for 30 plus years, right? They've been selflessly working on projects like this just for no financial compensation, just because they obviously want the world to be a freer place, right? Like you can fake conviction for 5-6 years maybe, but there's a long track record of these guys doing really, really innovative, cool stuff that blows people away outside of the industry, right? Like other people are going to hear about this and go, wow, that is crazy. They're building a network that has that kind of redundancy and that kind of fault tolerance. That's just awesome.
Yeah, I'm with you 100%. It's an incredible feat, and it's like it's like when the satellite first came out. It's like, oh wow, this is an amazing thing where we have this network that's being more anti-fragile. It's being built up every day. And yeah, these sort of things, these developments, I'm sure they cross the span where, you know, not just cryptocurrency experts are looking into this. They hear about it and they wonder, like, how exactly are they doing this, and the tech involved. And yeah, all this hopefully just brings more people into the space. And, you know, this kind of news that hopefully be coming in at from the right angle to understand that, you know, this is groundbreaking, and we're not just trying to do another thing.
Totally. And one of the things that this highlights, I think, is the block size issue again, right? If this is really low bandwidth stuff, right? You're getting as little data as possible from one side of the globe to the other, as you know, literally as little as possible, because it extends your range, right? Like, you're changing the frequency and that's increasing the noise. And so you're trying to cut this down to the least amount of data that you can possibly transmit, because that increases the range and effectively increases the security of the network. So we're constantly going back to this issue of, we need to keep things small and lean, because it opens up all these really, really interesting possibilities. And if we get the cart before the horse and we start getting excited about medium of exchange way before it even makes sense, because not that many people own Bitcoin yet, then we lose out on what we really want to do, right? We lose out on the ability to create an asset that's just not worth attacking. But this is good progress.
Now all we need is just that uplink direction for the satellite, and we got ourselves a network going.
Yeah, we need to cut the block size from where it's at right now down to maybe 25%, just so we can expand that range a little bit better. There's no downside to it, because it doesn't make sense to be a medium exchange right now. So that should be the next hard fork. Let's drop the block size. Let's turn this thing around on these guys. They've obviously shown
micro blocks.
Exactly. They've obviously shown a huge interest in compromising our system and making it weaker by making unnecessarily large blocks. Let's go the other direction. Maybe they know something we don't, and we should pay attention to that.
Yeah, I think that's a really strong point. Like, I just want to reiterate, was like, you know, that block size, you know, this is important to have a small, you know, block weight or block size to get these transmissions through. And you're right, it's like the bigger blocks, that it just can't happen with that. Like, this groundbreaking tech needs that small amount of bandwidth going through.
Yeah, and with something like Lightning Network, we get both, right? We can have Lightning or side chains. We don't need it right now, but we can have medium of exchange sort of stuff. I think it's useful to have that stuff, because it helps all of the potential investors see just how powerful Bitcoin is. So it's almost like we want those medium of exchange features as an educational tool, so that people will jump on it as a store of value. And what's great is, even though we don't need it for anything other than education, we can go live with this stuff in the next year or two and have everything that we want as far as speed and throughput, and a much more secure blockchain. So I'm excited about the future, even though this attack really sucks and it does get depressing.
Yeah, it does. But I think I'm going to take the lead on this next story. Chris, you got the screen share ready for that DEA?
Got it right up here, man. Got it right up here.
Oh yeah, not the DEA, the U.S. Treasury. Yeah, they're getting together with FinCEN, and they want to go over their cryptocurrency policies and the way that they practice monitoring cryptocurrencies. And you know, I think that we mentioned this a little bit earlier, how, you know, there's direct feeds of this information coming in, and, you know, these guys know how to track this information. And the Department of the Treasury, sorry, the U.S. Treasury, they really, you know, they want to get in on this. Like some of the other stories that we're about to cover talk about trying to possibly tame Bitcoin and regulate Bitcoin. And yeah, with the U.S. Treasury working with FinCEN here, I feel like we're starting to see, like that Shinobi was saying, like how there's like I don't want to get too conspiratorial and saying like this is going to happen, where they try and take over the network to see like everything that we're doing. But, you know, we know that FinCEN's really good at tracking these transactions, and if they want to get together with them to understand this cryptocurrency policy that they have as far as tracking this stuff, I think they're going to become really efficient at that. And they're supposed to be doing that here this year. I mean, this was all released in the Office of Inspector General's 2018 fiscal plan, which started October 1st. So, I mean, like, they could already be meeting up with these guys to try and figure out how to monitor this network. And yeah, I think it's just really important to sort of see how even our own government, you know, especially our own government's trying to work their way into this. And hopefully it's not going to be Orwellian like we were describing earlier, but it definitely shows that they're interested in it.
Yeah, I mean, like, the one thing I'm kind of worried about in seeing all of these, like, different branches or bureaucratic organizations start talking to each other is, you know, it's kind of a call back to the whole Coinbase situation with the IRS and the revelation that they've been running, the IRS being they have been running chain analytics software since like 2015, and still felt the need to try to subpoena all that Coinbase information to actually make sense of that. And I'm kind of worried about potentially like a new organization being created specifically to monitor these things and kind of remove these frictions to actually cross coordinate across all these different departments. And like, once we actually get to that point, if things start going in that direction, like, that would pretty much put that on steroids.
Yeah, I think that you know, we are starting to see that, where it's like the Fed, the bankers are starting to talk about, you know, blockchain, and, you know, the Fed chair that Donald Trump's sort of touting around is talking about, you know, he's not against Bitcoin. And we've seen the SEC talk about how they want to form a cyber division. And yeah, it wouldn't really be that surprising to me if we saw a whole new organization pop up as a result of Bitcoin and somebody trying to regulate it.
Yeah, I mean, up until now, anything that has to do with cryptography that's basically the job of the NSA, right? The signals intelligence and cryptography is their bread and butter. And we don't know what their budget is, but it's really, really big, right? Like, it's so big that we're not even allowed to know what it is. Like, they won't even, you could be on the defense, I think the defense budget committee or whatever in Congress, and you're still not allowed to know what the NSA's budget is. So, you know, those guys they're not unaware, right? They're not unaware of what Bitcoin is. I think, on the other hand, though, the nice thing about Bitcoin in a way is that it's happening slowly. So it's easy to think about these big agencies as like actors in and of themselves, but really they're made up of individual actors, and most of them aren't. You know, it's not that they're all dumb, but they're not the guys that could have gotten a job at Google, right? Like, these are always going to be second stringers. And they're working in an environment that is really, really bureaucratic and boring, right? There is no 24, you know, sitting in a room. It's all cubicles, you know. It's all, you join the CIA, you basically read foreign newspapers, right? Like, these jobs they're not super exciting. And those individual people would have to be motivated enough to do something. And if Bitcoin was moving fast, you might have somebody, you know, faster than a 9-year period. You might have somebody that's in a position where their job is going to be really affected by it. If it happens at a slower pace, even though this is pretty rapid, I think it's slow enough to where it's not going to affect any one individual's job in these agencies. And that, you know, maybe that's a little bit of false comfort, but it's a little bit of comfort that maybe it's just not worth messing with until it's too late.
No, I'm with you on that. Like, I take a little bit of comfort in knowing that, you know, maybe there is like a mantra within these organizations to regulate and to control. But like you're saying, the individual will probably see the investment and the smart move as far as like when they start looking into it. It's like, yeah, we go to work and we say this thing, but when I go home, I'm buying Bitcoin and I'm holding it.
Exactly. Yeah, that's a whole nother dimension, right? Like, if you're assigned to find out, you're the guy that goes and does the research to find out if Bitcoin's going to work, and you wake up the next day and go, oh my God, it's going to work. Do you go into the office and say, you know, let's attack this thing, or do you just put in a buy order? That's a good point.
Yeah. And, you know, moving right along with that, this as far as like people trying to control it, the CME group, they recently said that they were going to try and tame Bitcoin, and the guy, the CME group chairman Leo Melamed said this. He said, "We will regulate, make Bitcoin not wild nor wilder. We'll tame it into a regular type of instrument of trade with rules." And he says, he also mentioned, I'm still that same guy who believes in at least examining change. So, I mean, like, to me, I feel like, it's kind of going right along with like you're saying, the slow evolution of Bitcoin. I feel like CME Group, they listed these futures ahead of the SEC approving their regulation because they are pretty confident in that. And I feel like this is that sort of slow regulation coming in where they're not necessarily going to tame Bitcoin, like he says, but I imagine like this is just more of these groups coming in to try and stamp out their claim.
Seems like they have better chance with Ethereum.
Yeah, I was just going to say whether they think that they could really tame this thing or not. That's definitely what you say when you're hoping the SEC is going to approve it, right? I'm going to make your problems go away, guys. Don't worry. Just let me get these futures listed, and we'll make everything nice and smooth and easy, and there won't be any volatility, and nothing bad will happen. That's definitely the right thing to say, whether you believe it or not.
Yeah, sorry. It's definitely the bullish statement, trying to, the regulations are coming through, and same thing with the CBOE. They're also really bullish on ETF news. The CBOE is a Chicago-based group that competes with CME, and they were also stated here today saying that they see ETFs on the horizon and possible blockchain ETFs before Bitcoin, which, I thought that was pretty funny to, we could see some sort of SEC regulation on those before Bitcoin. But this is all falling in line with, everybody coming in to try and take control. So they think.
Yeah, one thing I wanted to get your opinion on, JW, like one of our Twitter followers actually tweeted at us the other day, kind of asking what we thought about the potential for like the CME effectively being used as a way to kind of shift things over to the like to support 2x effectively as far as the liquidity goes. And I was kind of not really sure to address that question of like, are you worried of that as an attack vector, especially considering that comes into like a legal territory where like now I can go to a business and be like, well, hey, what gives you the legal right to just rename this derivative asset as something else?
Yeah, I'm not. I don't feel like the name is at all defensible, right? Like we don't have a trademark. We can't go to the government and say, "Hey, somebody else is using our name." So I think I'm not too. I feel like it's going to hurt if we lose the name or if people start using the exact same name, especially if they're well-funded attackers and they can kind of get that name out in the public consciousness, because we do have a valuable asset in that. But I try not to be too worried about it because I feel like that's inevitable, right? At some point, like there's Bitcoin vodka right now that you can buy in Russia. Right? At some point, somebody's going to release a cryptocurrency and just flat out call it Bitcoin, and whether they convince the community or not.
Well, yeah, but to like trade that at an exchange though is another thing, or to like actually initiate that decision as a business. Because I mean, like you might say the name isn't defensible. I would actually argue the exact opposite. Like I have a pretty hard line stance. It seems to me, like talking to a lot of people, but in my opinion, Bitcoin was like defined by Satoshi. Like that.
No. You and me will continue to, you and me will continue to use the name, and we'll say.
But I mean though, like that's a legally arguable point. Like I can point to this definition by Satoshi and say that when a chain is no longer compatible to that definition, it's not Bitcoin. Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah, but we've improved a lot since Satoshi wrote that white paper, right? We've changed some stuff.
Yeah, but it's all been soft forks. So like if you were to feed this chain right now to the original Satoshi client, it might not be able to keep up in terms of like the efficiency of processing things, but this chain would be valid to that consensus rule set.
Yeah, so I guess I'm not saying that you don't have a rational argument, right? Like I'm with you. Like I think 2x it'd be an abomination to call that thing Bitcoin. Again, my definition of Bitcoin is the digital asset that's the most hard to steal, right? So I don't care whether Core has their repo or not. That's what I will forever refer to as Bitcoin. And I think that's in line with what Satoshi was trying to accomplish, right? He was trying to create this digital asset that was state proof. That said, I think it's just an inevitable attack that's going to happen. And I think if we think that we can go to governments for justice, then we probably just haven't experienced the government's justice system very much. So I don't see being able to sue an exchange for changing the name, and especially if the U.S. government, if I'm going to the U.S. government and the U.S. government is encouraging CME in some way to do this, then I definitely don't buy into the idea of separation of powers. I think that's a fallacy. And if I thought that I could get justice from our existing justice system, I wouldn't be as motivated of a Bitcoiner. So.
Well, I mean, but it's kind of a fine line, though, because I mean, like, the government can't just send a police officer out in broad daylight to shoot somebody they don't like in the head and then everything's okay. Like, they have to stay within the range of what the public finds acceptable or will at least like not react against. And that kind of puts things in a fine line where if you approach like a court with an argument that is rational even to the casual observer, like they can't just go no, because everybody will go, what the fuck was that?
Yeah, and then they'll go, what the fuck was that? And that'll be the end of it. Did you see what happened to Ross Ulbricht? They took this guy before the jury. They stood in front of the jury and they said, this guy is guilty of murder. He has hired the assassination of multiple people. Ross's attorney later stood up and said, I would like to provide evidence that my client did not hire the killing of anybody. And the judge said, no, because he's not charged with that. That never.
But again, though, this is kind of an aspect of like that public perception because of like with the specifics of what Ulbricht did. Like, even though it was legally fucked, like the result is what most people would expect or perceive as an acceptable result. And so because of the specifics of that, like that flew. But when you remove that, like that drug dealer or the murderer from that like situation, like I don't think it's as easy to just do that and then not expect serious public backlash.
Yeah, that's cool. I'm just not as optimistic. I mean, I think I put a lot of confidence in code that can't be destroyed by trillion-dollar efforts. I don't put a lot of confidence in popular opinion. Like I don't even believe in democracy, right? Like I believe that democracy is designed. If you read Hans Hermann Hoppe, I think he makes a really good case that that democracy is like the opposite of the free market, where in the free market you have competition to create goods, and under democracy in this political system we actually have competition to create bads. And so in the same way that you can be pretty sure that your iPhone is just about as good as it could possibly be, as long as governments aren't involved with regulating it and all that nonsense, you can be just as confident that our current president is as bad as he could possibly be. So I have a pretty dark perspective on going to the government for help, but maybe maybe it will work out. But so that said, I think even if they did that, right, there's a lot of money that's being used to prop up maybe even Ethereum, right? Like if one of the things that I'm good at is I put myself in the perspective of the attacker, right? And I say, if I wanted to destroy this thing, what are the things that I could do? If I wanted to destroy Bitcoin, I would definitely want there to be a plethora of coins out there that looked plausible, right? Like the more Bitcoin shows obvious domination, the worse off things are. If Bitcoin has all of the great scientists, and if Bitcoin has all of the great technology, then that's not good for me as an attacker, right? But if I could say, well, these guys have smart contracts and these guys have proof of stake, and that's much better, and these guys have other stuff, that's good for me as an attacker. So as an attacker, if I had a lot of budget, I would be propping up all of these things, right? I mean, the amount of money that you'd have to pour into all of these currencies to prop up any of them would hardly be a blip on a, you know, on a 5-year budget for any government agency, any of the ones that would be messing with this stuff. And that doesn't even touch the fact that, like, you've got the Treasury and the Fed, and these guys can literally print money and they can't be audited, right? So if we wanted to prop up one of these things, we could just print money, put it into it. You guys are going to notice a banana is an extra 2 cents in a year and a half. Who cares, right? Like, that's not even a blip on the radar. So so I think that the worst thing that you can think of, you should assume that that's going to happen at some point if it's not happening right now. I think it probably is happening with these altcoins that are inherently insecure. But you know, if CME started doing that with another altcoin like SegWit2x that was inherently insecure, I'm not going to lose any sleep over it. For me, the equation selfishly is, how long is it going to take for Bitcoin to become money? Because the longer it takes, the more people suffer in the meantime. On the other hand, the longer it takes, the richer all of the wise investors are going to be, right? Because there's going to be all these distractions and these people that won't take the time to figure out that a guy that jumps around on the stage like CSW is not a clown, and you shouldn't think he was Satoshi and follow him, because he's never made a contribution in any way ever in the field of cryptography, right? We kind of want those people not to have as much influence. So, you know, it might take longer, but the people that have more influence in this new world will be wiser. So maybe that's a trade-off that's okay.
Yeah, I think it's an understandable question too, just because the large amount of money in CME and SegWit2x, and just you know, the possibility with the different exchanges that they're using to spot the price, and you know, if there is some sort of collusion there, what could they do?
I gotta say though, I agree with most of what you said. Like, I'm very much in favor of things happening more gradually than just a spike up. I mean, like, I think Greg Maxwell made this point years ago. Like, if things go too fast, too like radically, then that's dangerous, because that's like, this is something that is going to affect the very social stability of like large nations if this continues going where we think it is. And if that happens too radically, like, that's the type of things that like wars get fought over. Like, if things are destabilized too fast, there isn't enough time to start building like other alternative organizations or structures to kind of smooth that a little bit for the people who have to live through it.
Yeah,
Well, not
yeah,
even
absolutely.
just that. I mean, the hardware development, the software development that needs to be done. Like, there's so much work, like from you know, the whole stack. Like, it's all encompassing. Lots of work to be done.
Yeah, so I guess the answer to the question is, I think it's possible. I don't know if we would notice, because it's probably already happening. Because the same people that would bring about those effects, they already have the budget, right? And they already have the mechanism. They don't need it to be there. I think the thing that people are most worried about with these you know, ETFs and stuff is just that there's going to be market manipulation like there is in the gold market, where people, they think they have gold because it shows up in their 401k. And somebody did the math at one point, but it's an insane amount of gold that doesn't exist that people think they have in their account right now. And it's an attack on gold, essentially, because what they're trying to do, they look the other way, and they don't enforce, you know, fraud and, you know, other things, right? The justice system doesn't work in this case. But what that does is it makes people think that they have gold that don't, and that makes gold, for people that know that there's fraud in the system, less of an attractive asset than the dollar, you know, comparatively. And it also keeps the price of gold down, because if you want to buy gold and you go and buy gold, then you actually just buy a piece of paper. It doesn't affect the market price. That's going to be a lot harder to do with Bitcoin, though, because it's just so easy to audit, right? Like, it's not an uncommon thing for for people that are storing gold to have to go and literally melt it all down and retest it and pour it because there's, you know, some fake gold in the system, right? And then investors freak out, and the only way to deal with that, like, you can't just drill it. You actually have to melt it freaking down to liquid, pour it in a big vat, and then test that bad boy and say, yep, it's still gold. With Bitcoin, they could just periodically publish cryptographic evidence that they still have these assets. So I think it's going to be a good thing in the long run, and I don't think that I don't think we should be, like, in the short term, you should be scared of a lot of things with Bitcoin, right? Like, the price could definitely, there's a lot of players that want to see it not successful, that have the power to affect the price in the short term. So any short-term trader, God bless you, but I don't know how this is going to work out for you. But for a long-term holder, I think, you know, like I said, I think it's inevitable that it's going to win.
Great. Well, on that note, Monkey, you ready to wrap this up? Been one of our longest shows, actually.
Mm-hmm. And we've actually maintained viewers through most of it, so I guess we stayed interesting.
Yeah, we did. So thanks very much, JW. You're only 2 weeks old, so happy birthday. 2 weeks old in the Bitcoin space. I love this identity. I love these ephemeral identities that we can just create. And James Bond did a lot of like stylometric analysis on you whilst you were talking. James Bond is one of our fans, slightly obsessed with me, a bit disturbingly so. He's in the chat. He's figuring out that you're right-handed, you're using a Mac, and you've got dark hair, and you're a fan of Star Wars, and he thinks that's enough that he can triangulate that. So yeah,
it's possible, but in the words of Adam Back, it's not nice to dox people. So even if you could, don't do it.
We even had some people speculating that maybe you are Satoshi himself, but you don't have to answer that. You don't have to respond.
No, that's absurd.
that Yoda in the background is just like ominous, like staring at it.
I tell you what,
that's Satoshi.
If you really want to profile me, if you can figure out what book Yoda has moved to, then that'll help too. He's given up on the impersonal God that is the Force, and he thinks God is a personal being now. So that'll narrow it down. He's had an enlightenment.
Well, that's your homework, guys. That's your homework for the week. Well, look, thanks very much to everyone. It's been one of our longest shows, and what I think I might do is just edit out that first interview, make that into a video in its own right, but obviously keep this one as it is, because I think that was a really, really cool segment there at the very beginning. So, final thoughts, anybody, just before we go for our outro? Monkey, anyone? Oh,
everybody. Okay.
Yeah, I just thought it was really funny because yesterday in our title we were like using a Star Wars reference, and then we have Chewbacca in the show today.
Yeah. I'll summarize by saying join the rebellion.
Yeah, here. So yeah, I guess
Wookiees. You need more Wookiees.
Chris, who's going to win the fight today? Is liking and subscribing optional, or is it mandatory today?
It's always optional, but do remember that if you didn't like what you saw today, to keep the metrics pure, please press the dislike button, unsubscribe, or maybe just leave a comment and tell us what you didn't like about it. Yeah.
I was hoping we could make it mandatory today.
Maybe even report the video. I mean, fuck it. If you really didn't like it, just report it for abusive content. Over to YouTube, and we'll get a strike against our account. I'm just trying to keep shit honest here, guys. All right, trying to keep shit real, not into like this soliciting of like, subscribe. Okay, we ready to tune out?
Yeah, you got some proof of work to do by hand in the basement.
Yes, you're right, Monkey. I do. I will do that, sir, right after I finish this. Okay, guys. Yeah, thanks very much for tuning in. You can join us on the chat room where we have lots of really erudite conversations just like this one, bitcoinmumble.com, and we will see you next time. Bye-bye.